Welcome everyone to the GovHack Digital Conference for this evening, where we have the Clean Energy Regulator speaking about using data to reach net zero with the Clean Energy Regulator. We'll be joined by Marianne Wilson, the Chief Digital Officer at the Clean Energy Regulator, shortly. Before we do this, I would first like to acknowledge the traditional custodians of the various lands on where all of you are watching from. Where I am streaming this from, I acknowledge the Yuggera and the Turrbal people. GovHack would like to acknowledge all the Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islanders peoples participating in GovHack. GovHack and myself pay respects to elders past and present and celebrate the diversity of the Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander peoples and their ongoing cultures and connections to the lands and waters of Australia. I would now like to welcome in Marianne. Thank you for joining us this evening.
Thanks for that kind introduction, Jason. So, Marianne Wilson, I'm the Chief Data Officer for the Clean Energy Regulator, and today I just wanted to briefly introduce you to the Clean Energy Regulator, some of the work that we do and how data features in delivering our outcomes. So many of you hopefully have heard that the Australian government has committed to a net zero emissions target by 2050 and to reduce greenhouse gas emissions by 43% by 2030. And reducing greenhouse gas emissions in the atmosphere obviously helps to limit climate change. The Clean Energy Regulator is a government agency who administers schemes that measure, manage and reduce or offset Australians' carbon emissions and encourage the uptake of renewable energy. We have a clear purpose, which is to accelerate carbon abatement for Australia. And through those schemes and that purpose, we're contributing to the government's broader goal of net zero. Within the Clean Energy Regulator, data is at the heart of everything we do. We have a data strategy vision to support emissions reduction and accelerate carbon abatement through high quality data and sophisticated analytic capabilities and systems. And like many other organisations and agencies in Australia and throughout the world, we're on a journey to do more with data, to build our capability, to improve our management and governance, to find interesting insights and innovations. Data is at the heart of how we regulate and undertake our compliance activities. It underpins our effective operations of our schemes and informs our policy analysis and development. If you have or seen our quarterly carbon market reports, which is a new innovation for markets underpinned by data, we already give out benefits in the order of several $billion each year in the form of carbon credits and certificate units. So starting to present data in ways that are meaningful to the market so it can make informed decisions is really important. But it's not just through the publication of our quarterly carbon market that we're using our reports. We're also looking at ways to help companies assess the progress they're making towards their greenhouse gas emission goals. We're increasingly looking to use data science to help us with our work, whether that's machine learning for geospatial images, whether it is development of apps to help streamline participation in our schemes, or simply visualizations that help us monitor progress and performance. So data and trusted data is critical, not just for internal use, but for the public. Now, it is the case that we do operate under some restrictions within our schemes that can limit the data that we share. But some of the examples that I have just given you are key indicators of our willingness to progressively make available where we can the data that we hold. As a regulator, we want to be trusted, relevant, and an expert institution. And some of the ways that we help find and access our data is through our website. So if I move across to here, I've highlighted just one of the sort of portals, if you like, where you could start to learn about some of the data that we hold. It's mostly raw data. So the information hub is the area that you might be interested in having a look at. That could involve you understanding the types of activities we're doing to reduce emissions through projects in vegetation regeneration, capture of landfill gases. The register is held here. There is information on our carbon markets through that hub. There is information including at a postcode level of where you might see rooftop solar through that hub. Australia's biggest emitters regularly have their information published on our website, again, able to be accessed through that hub. So just to touch briefly on some of the schemes that we do run here in the Clean Energy Regulator. The National Greenhouse and Energy Reporting Scheme, it presents a framework for reporting greenhouse gas emissions, energy generation and consumption for Australia's largest companies. And the data that we collect through that scheme is then used to inform government policy, to contribute to Australia's international reporting on greenhouse gas emissions, and for the public. Some of the largest facilities also have limits placed on them under this mechanism, known as the safeguard mechanism. And that's been in the public recently as the government looks to find ways to gradually reduce that limit available for the facilities to drive uptake towards the target. We administer the Emissions Reduction Fund in the Clean Energy Regulator, and that's a scheme that allows landholders, communities and businesses to run projects in Australia that both avoid the use of greenhouse gas emissions as well as store carbon from the atmosphere. There are many types of activities that can be undertaken within that scheme. On the slide here is just a few. Soil carbon projects, savanna fire management, where the timing of fire can reduce greenhouse gas emissions when it's conducted earlier in the season rather than when it occurs naturally later in the seasons in a much hotter burn. Landfill gas flaring, revegetation are just some of the examples. And the credits that are derived from those projects are both sold to the government and increasingly to businesses who are looking to surrender those to reduce their emissions footprint. The Renewable Energy Target is another scheme run by the agency, and it effectively provides incentives to support the uptake of both large and small-scale generation of renewable electricity. We all use electricity to power our homes and businesses, and increasingly the proportion of that electricity is coming from renewables as a result of this particular scheme. Since the target was met in 2020 under this scheme, incentives have continued to drive forward investment in large-scale wind and in solar as companies look to reduce their footprints for emissions and to demonstrate that they are indeed using renewables. Households have also been switching in increasing numbers to solar rooftop, and during the pandemic you might be interested to know when many people were at home and unable to travel or use their discretionary funds for other things, they were undertaking rooftop solar and switching to use internally with the extra going to the market. That helps households take action to decarbonise. I've mentioned earlier about our quarterly carbon market report, and that provides a quarterly sense of the supply and demand dynamics in the carbon markets, whether that's through the renewable markets that I've been talking about at the large and small scale, or whether it's from the Emission Reduction Fund and activities that offset emissions. That data is used by a wide range of stakeholders and it's catering to a broad audience, changing all the time in terms of interest in the carbon markets growing at a rapid rate. I really recommend people have a look at that report. One of our new initiatives is a transparency initiative, which has asked corporates to volunteer to present to Australia what their greenhouse gas emission targets are and to allow the Clean Energy Regulator to calculate for certain types of targets the progress that they are making towards those commitments. Here's a single example for the Coles Group of a couple of the targets that they are running and the progress that they have made. In the first year, which was a pilot phase, we were fortunate enough for 23 companies to participate in this initiative, which represented a little bit under a quarter of Scope 1 emissions reported to the regulator. So it's a great first start. And we're really looking forward to where that develops over time as people get to understand how are companies thinking about reducing their emissions, what are they doing to make that happen, and is it making a difference to their emissions footprint. All of this work, and here's a particular example, leverages the data that we already collect under the National Greenhouse Energy Reporting Scheme, under the Renewable Energy Target and under the Emissions Reduction Fund, brings it together and presents it in a meaningful way for companies. So they are just a few of the initiatives that we have been using our data for internally and externally here at the regulator. There is a lot to be done. We're also rebuilding many of our systems and looking to provide the right support for people participating in our schemes to be able to do more with the information that we provide, to have a streamlined experience where their benefits are derived more quickly with the right checks and balances. And in doing that, data is at the heart of it. It's helping us understand what the opportunities are available to us in designing our websites, our smart forms, our background checking, what analytics we might need, what reporting is important to us, and what information might need to be published. So there's a lot happening in the Clean Energy Regulator. So cheekily, I thought I would conclude with, if you're interested in work to increase carbon abatement for Australia, if data is something that fascinates you, whether that's in managing projects, whether that's as a specialist, as a data scientist, a data modeler, a data engineer, whether you're really fascinated in doing great visualizations, get in touch with us. We're recruiting now. We have a temporary register. We look forward to hearing from you. Thanks very much.
Okay. Thank you very much, Marianne, for that talk. It was great to see some of the things that is happening in Australia around carbon abatement. Is there any things that you can suggest, key data sets that you might suggest our participants be looking at in the next coming couple of days before the competition is launched?
I'd like to say yes, but I'm not quite sure about the rules in terms of our sort of forthcoming question. What I can say is the Clean Energy Regulator is sponsoring GovHack this year and is really excited to be doing so. So we have posed a question. We do think that actually broader data sets might be of use in looking at our question beyond those. We're not necessarily pointing to our data sets and asking for those to be recut, but for people to take a wider view around public data sets, public use, what they know and understand and would like to see done differently, or ways that you could contribute to Australia meeting its target. That's probably as much as I can say in a general sense without actually directing people to a solution that might limit their ability to innovate.
I think what I would add to that is Marianne gave some very good hints around what our mission is here at the Clean Energy Regulator. Maybe that's a good place to start.
Yeah, that works well, because one of the things for GovHack, it's not just using one data set. It's about making a mashup of multiple different data sets, bringing together different things in unique and creative ways. So one of the things that Rhiannon, who's also joining us here, said earlier when I was speaking to her, that GovHack is gives you permission to try new things, to try out something brand new, mash things up, and just have a bit of fun. So looking at your data, you mentioned data around rooftop solar. Does this give it sort of more in like, this suburb has this amount of solar generation potential, or is it?
It's a performance-based data set. So under our renewable energy target scheme, we give out what are known as small-scale technology certificates for every, and this gets a bit technical, but every megawatt hour of solar that's generated based on an assumed profile for where you live. So the data sets that are published are by postcode rather than suburb. And what you can see is the number of households, for example, that have installed the data. Obviously, the postcode helps you understand where that data is. For those who do like to mishmash different data sets together, the method takes into account which areas get more solar and therefore would generate more electricity than some other areas. And what I can tell you is not only are Australians increasingly putting rooftop solar on their roofs, they're putting in place larger rooftop solar systems than they ever used to. So we think there's been a real shift in appetite and attitude about generating your own solar for, firstly, internal use in the home, with people working from home and spending more time at home. They're wanting to generate electricity for themselves, and then looking either to originally export but increasingly store solar for other times in the day, such as, or later in the evening when they might want to switch on their appliances when their kids are home from school. So you can see some of the data there, but there's some great ways to integrate with other data sets to get that richer understanding, I think, that you're alluding to, Jason, about what's really going on there.
Yeah. So it's like, you can, so I know up here in Queensland where I am, we have, it's like over 33% of households in southeast Queensland have solar on top of them, and that's growing every year. So it's great to see that people are joining the community to start generating their own energy, so that it's not just using all coal and non-renewables.
Yeah, so interestingly enough, last year, there was, in fact, if you think about it in this way, a bigger power station, which was the collective rooftops of Australians installed, than the large number of big utility scale wind and solar power stations. They generated less electricity than our rooftops. So that's, yeah, it's pretty substantial. We would say 1 in 3 accessible rooftops has solar right now in Australia. So there are some challenges for, you know, some types of buildings and some arrangements, but it's definitely increasing, and it's noticeably contributing to the decarbonisation journey.
It's On my phone, I've been looking at data apps that look at the different energy producers, and there's been a few days in summer that I noticed where it's like where solar was the main producer in multiple areas around Australia.
Yeah, that's true. There's
Yeah.
also times of the day where, in fact, there is what they call now negative demand, where there, and the reason for that has a lot to do with solar, both utility scale and rooftop, because in the middle of the day when it's very sunny and it's generating at its peak, on some days in some circumstances there's more generation occurring than there is demand for electricity in the networks.
Yeah. So it's important to be mindful of that and look at ways that we can encourage people to also use that excess generation in an appropriate way, whether that's either storing it for later use or potentially putting it into like an EV to transport around.
Yeah, or to consider opportunities for activities that perhaps are not currently electrified that could be electrified using renewables.
Yeah. Okay. That comes to the conclusion for the presentation. Was there any last words that you would like to share?
Only to thank you for facilitating and supporting GovHack. It's a really important initiative that gives people a real opportunity to explore data and innovate and come up with some practical ideas that hopefully will find take up and solutions beyond the competition. So thank you.
I look forward to seeing more about what your challenge is about when it gets released on Friday night. I'm sure some of my colleagues that work in the energy sector will be quite interested in putting in an entry into it. So on the weekend, we'll have some mentors from the Clean Energy Regulator available to speak to our participants. Yeah.
I'll be available the whole weekend, so people can look for me online or participating in person in Canberra. So my name's Rihanna Blackthorn, and I'll, if you need some help or if you need some guidance, please tap me on the shoulder.
Okay, awesome. Thank you very much. So thank you very much for the two of you for joining us here this evening. It's been a great talk to both listen to what you were saying and then to have a chat with you afterwards. So for those of you that are online at the moment, we're going to be taking a short break and then we're going to be having a talk around human-centered design problems presented from Mural and Luma. So come back to us in about half an hour at 7 o'clock Eastern Standard Time for that talk. So thank you very much, and I look forward to seeing more people in that talk and on the competition weekend. Thank you very much.
Thank you.